Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to another episode of the Talkroom series of podcasts. In this episode, we'll examine the question of how to be your best self. We do that by examining mental health and well-being and how that applies to people's daily lives. For those people who have yet to see any of our previous podcasts, I'd like to introduce my co-presenter, Wendy. Wendy is an accredited cognitive behavioural psychotherapist and EMDR therapist. She's been in private practice now for well over 35 years. So a very, very warm welcome to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Ian, and a very, very warm welcome to you. And you are a senior accredited National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society member and a founder of Hope Therapy and Counselling Services, which provides therapy and counselling through the entire UK and has a very rich range of experienced therapists and counsellors that you can access via your website. So a warm welcome to you as well, Ian.
Thank you. So today we're going to be looking at the really important subjects of the use of nurturing figures in therapy. So can we just start, Wendy, by you telling us a little bit about what we mean by nurturing figures and what that does?
Yes, certainly, Ian. So in lots of different types and forms of psychotherapy, the use of imagination, imagining nurturing figures, can play a really special and unique role in areas such as learning how to self-soothe. Another area is processing trauma, and also it's used in anxiety management too. So if it's okay with you, and I'd quite like to perhaps give you some practical examples, because I think this will really demonstrate how this kind of technique can be used
Please.
in various therapy approaches. Thank you. So the first one to start with is this idea of an individual getting good at sort of self-soothing themselves if they're suffering from any kind of distress or anxiety or depression or trauma. Actually being able to calm yourself down is a very good and important first step in therapy. And this is often called compassionate imagery. And the first one involves creating a safe place. So this is not necessarily a person, it's more of a place. And this can be an actual place or a place completely in the individual's imagination. But the idea, and you can ask them these questions, something that represents either calmness or feelings of safety, security, or even comfort for that individual person. So they choose the place themselves. And it can be anything you like. A common one is the landscape or anywhere that they go locally where they associate with calm relaxation. We've had all kinds of examples. We've had spa retreats. We've had holidays, relaxing in the sun. The one that surprised me the most was a rave. That's where she felt the calmness and the most calm. So it's very, very individual. And the idea is that once they've created this calm, relaxing place of comfort, they can continue to act as if they were there, like a mental refuge. So they can go back there again and again and again. And this reinforces the feelings of them actually inside them. They're actually feeling a true sense of feeling calm, relaxed, and comforted. And also, you can use a nurturing figure in the same way to create a sense of calmness or safety. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later on. And the other thing you can do is actually evoking feelings of compassionate emotions. So using imagery in a compassionate way helps people, especially those who've got a very critical voice, to actually find another part of themselves to create different emotions, feelings of warmth, feelings of kindness towards themselves, feeling self-acceptance. And so this is where it can work really well if the individual visualizes an actual person who ideally is a real person who they perceive is supportive in their lives. So ideally, the person then visualizes the image of the person in detail. And they go through the main senses. So how they look, how they sound, how they behave towards the person. Things like their facial expression can be important. Somebody who's sort of warm and kind. Tone of voice is really important. Somebody who's got a sort of like a warmth or encouraging tone of voice rather than a critical voice. And also what language they use. Ideally, the language is positive and affirming. Now, what can happen is that the individual doesn't know a person like that who they can actually find. So, the other really good thing is that this figure can be imagined and it can be anybody the person wants. It could be a character from a film, a hero, or even a spiritual being, even a color or an essence of a person. They can be as creative as they want.
That's absolutely fascinating. Really, really interesting, Wendy. Thank you for that. So, if we try and apply that to a practical thing, uh, if we think about nurturing figures and how they might be used for something like anxiety, for example, really common presentation, how would that work?
Yeah, very good question, Ian. Thank you for that. So, what I notice is most people with anxiety have a really high self-critical inner dialogue. You know, they're sort of their own worst enemies. They're sort of really hard on themselves. They think of the worst case scenarios. They're catastrophizing, and they don't think they can cope, which turns out to be a vicious circle, and that worsens their anxiety. So, actually developing a different voice, an inner voice that they can turn to when they feel anxious, when their thoughts arise. So, this is where they might actually have some anxious thoughts going on, and then they create this compassionate figure that we talked about earlier and they listen to them and they kind of really support them in many, many ways. They can actually reassure them, hold them, encourage them, and it gives them an alternative balance to the inner critic. It gives them another voice that they can actually listen to, which is reassuring them. Um, and also, a lot of people who are very, very anxious often have, very distressing moments. So, compassionate imagery can also serve as a sort of simple way of grounding a person, helping the person to stay present and calm when the anxiety strikes. So, for example, they can receive compassionate support so we can recall a time where they felt safe and loved. Imagine this person, even sort of, putting them on their lap and rocking them and sort of stroking their hair and actually just sort of saying, you're safe, I love you, I love you. It could be very, very simple and very, very powerful as that. And then what happens is once they feel the person is sort of like with them and they're keeping them safe, this helps them to sort of reduce the anxiety and therefore calms the nervous system and brings them back to a more relaxed state. So there's a different kind of use of it there. Um, and another way they can do it is that the compassionate image can also foster a sense of resilience. The compassionate imagery could encourage the person to look at their own strengths and self-worth. They could perhaps find somebody in their lives who is a really good coach or a mentor, maybe a teacher, or maybe a parent figure or a very good friend who constantly is saying all the things they like about them. And so the individual can listen to that again and again and again, and it reinforces their own strengths and self-worth. And then that actually can sort of help that person to really remind themselves and to feel a little bit more self-confident. So gradually, the individual starts to feel more able to get that sense of grounding and develop more emotional resilience because they don't believe it themselves. That's the problem. So actually, by creating another person, they sort of build up the emotional resilience for them. So another way, is it okay if I just explain another way you can use it?
Please, please.
So one way that to recover from anxiety is to actually put people in situations where they gradually take more risks. It's sort of exposure exercises. So say somebody is fearful of going to school, for example. So you would give them steps to, perhaps the first thing might be to walk to the school gates and then walk back again. And the next step might be to walk inside the school gates and then back again. The next step might be to walk to the door. Next step might be to, go in. Next step to go to the classroom and finally join the classroom. But you can see each of those steps is very, very anxiety provoking. So the compassionate imagery can actually support them at every step. So again, if they're stepping, say, towards the school for the first time, they feel overwhelmed, they feel they can't cope. Again, they visualize their supportive figure who actually can remind them of how they've coped, remind them how they've overcome previously feared situations. Again, that encouraging voice to say it's safe and they can do that is another example of how you can use a compassionate imagery. And the last one I want to say is to actually use a compassionate image in real life scenarios. So the clients can actually practice almost carrying their compassionate figure with them into real life situations that trigger anxiety. So this imagines the presence of the compassionate figure literally standing by their side, providing reassurance and encouragement. So, for example, say a person's been off work and they're going to work for the first time and they feel a bit overwhelmed and daunted by them. They can actually imagine the person sort of sitting beside them at their desks or actually talking to them, imagining them talking to them through their sort of computer and just sort of again saying, I'm there for you, encourage you, you're going to be fine as well. And it also can be useful to maybe have a reminder of your compassionate figure. You can actually have an object or something like that, or a little picture. If it's a real person, you can have a picture of something, take it with you, and just imagine that person talking to you, or maybe writing down some words as well. So, what would this sort of friend would say to me normally, and then you write down the words. So you've got something quite real and tangible to remind yourself of when you go back to work, what your compassionate imagery is saying.
Really fascinating again, Wendy, and just having that within the context of something like anxiety really just kind of brings it to life a little bit. So thank you for that. So can nurturing figures be used in things like stress reduction strategies as well?
Yes, very good question. And thank you for that. So, not only does it help anxiety, it can also help when somebody feels very overwhelmed in a situation. They feel they're just overworked or over busy, and you've got all this sort of adrenaline and cortisol going around your body, and it's sort of exhausting you and actually giving you a lot of demand. And research suggests actually that by regularly practicing compassionate imagery, um, even when you're not particularly distressed at the time, can actually really build up a habit of accessing this sort of self-soothing person quickly when needed. So one strategy could be is actually to sort of get into regular practice, maybe just a few minutes every day, just to focus on their compassionate image or whatever they want to do, their figure or their safe place. And that actually proves that actually the more you focus on it, the more it becomes part of you. It becomes easier and stronger, so that actually when you do have a real life stress, that part of you is easier to access. And also situations where you think you will be stressful, you can use imagery for preparing yourself for a real life scenario. So, as a practical example, maybe a difficult meeting that they think they're going to, which they normally find stressful, or a social event. Again, imagine that person being with you, maybe looking over your shoulder or across the table from you. And again, reminding you of all those qualities to stay calm, to just sort of trust themselves, remind themselves they're going to say the right thing, um, not to, not to get overwhelmed by their boss. I'm with you, can be a very, very powerful and very reassuring thing when in sort of difficult situations such as that. There's a couple of examples there.
Really helpful again, Wendy. Um, so I understand you can use nurturing figures in lots of different ways. But I understand you can also develop an aspect of yourself as being compassionate. And I wonder if you can just explain a little bit about how that works as well.
Yes, certainly. So sometimes by using an alternative figure is quite good for people when they first start therapy. They don't feel they've got it within themselves, and therefore they're kind of borrowing it from somebody else. But either further on in therapy or for some people, it can work better to have a part of themselves which is compassionate. So this is where they remind themselves that they've got a part of themselves which could be any qualities they want. Classic qualities would be this compassionate self would be warm, strong, wise, non-judgmental, and accepting. So this is where you would imagine yourself being compassionate. So you could imagine again yourself this time, standing a certain way, behaving a certain way, having their tone of voice, and actually imagine what they would say in a particular situation. So again, that's really more reinforcing the inner strength of the individual as well. Um, and this idea of this inner strength, again, just builds up that self-confidence a little bit more, that they can go and take themselves into difficult situations that they actually find as well. Um, and again, it doesn't always have to be compassion. They can have a compassionate part of themselves, but they can also have maybe a wise part of themselves or a courageous part of themselves as well. So again, it opens up the possibilities of creating different parts, which are also sort of strong and very wise. And another one, which it might sound a little bit sort of out there, but you can also use role play as well. So some therapists just use role play about the therapist might be certain different characters in their life or something like that. Or sometimes a client might be themselves, or they might role reverse and be their mother or their father and sort of see things from different situations. So it can be quite a useful tool in therapy. But you can also role play with the compassionate self as well. So you can actually role play uh, you being the compassionate self to yourself. So you sit in a chair and then you're being the compassionate part of you to yourself, or vice versa as well. So that also opens up some very interesting conversations you can have. And again, just building that up as well. So that's another technique you can use.
Finding this really fascinating, Wendy. So thank you. Um, so how would nurturing figures work if we apply it to something like trauma, for example?
Yes, and again, this is a really very useful tool in trauma. And actually, before you start working on the trauma, what you do in EMDR, which is a particular trauma therapy, is you would create a safe place and or a safe person as well. So you've always got that before you go into the trauma memories as well. Um, but you can also use it as a little bit of a sort of like an emotional anchor. So if people actually feel overwhelmed or they feel they're sort of going into the trauma too much or it's getting too deep, they can just move away, going into being this compassionate person, and they can sort of again hold their hand, whatever you want, take them to walk. You can get the compassionate person to take them to their safe place as well, and kind of again sort of treat them with lots of love and care and self-soothing as well. So again, they know that they've got somebody there, sort of take them there. And what's quite important in that situation, I think, is to have that. that compassionate image quite well formed before you're actually doing the trauma work. So again, working on that compassionate image, making it feel very sort of strong and real in that person's as a sort of very safe technique, so that they know, it gives them strength to actually go into the trauma memory and think, okay, I can do this because I know that I've got this sort of this other thing that will hold me there. And the other thing you can do is actually really help to regulate emotions during trauma processing. So, for example, in EMDR, individuals might start by focusing on traumatic memories for a while and then deliberately return to their compassionate image. So it's actually sort of part of the strategy. So you do like it's like a short time in the actual trauma and then go back to the compassionate image. So even before you need to, you go back to the compassionate image. And this really helps the person sort of feel, oh, I can actually face this very, very difficult thing. And because I'm not alone, I have somebody there to support me. And of course, one of the main things about processing trauma is you're trying to sort of work on changing the memory as well. So this is where the compassionate person's really good, because they're going to say all the things that actually the individual needs to hear as well about them being brave. It's not their fault. They did the best they can. So it's sort of like a natural interweave into actually seeing the situation differently from the client as well. So that's another example.
Fascinating. Um, so by creating a part of the individual as strong and compassionate can work. What other ways can nurturing figures be developed to be supportive of the self?
Yes, and if the individual is sort of okay about the concept of developing a compassionate other, you can take it. I think it's better to do that first one first and feel that real. Is again, I said it a little bit before, is open the possibilities of having multiple selves to actually support the person. And again, you can be as creative as you want, whatever quality you have someone to provide that quality. So it's often called an inner support team. So classic ones would be maybe having a character who was strong, another one wise, another one warm, and maybe another one kind. So the warm person can be just kind of like imagine a lovely warm blanket around you and just sort of like just that's really, really feeling that as well. And kind could be just doing a simple gesture like combing your, brushing your hair or smiling at you or something. It doesn't have to be very sort of strong. And of course, what people don't really realize is they're creating these parts of themselves. So it is actually them in their imagination. So again, those parts become stronger in them as well. It's also important to say that not everybody can create an image. Sometimes even a human figure is daunting to a person because they've been so let down by people. So again, what works really well is animals, especially pets. The number of dogs and cats I've had sort of being the compassionate being with people is very, very good, especially dogs, because they don't say a lot, but they've often got amazing, amazing sort of facial features and love a cuddle as well. But cats as well can be very, very good. So any pet, doesn't have to be a cat or a dog, and it can be an object as well. It can be another one created a mermaid, and that was beautiful for her and all the qualities of a mermaid as well. So whatever it is that works for you. Um, so and also again, you can have a representation of it again. So somebody might like have a like a little doll, perhaps of a mermaid or something like that, or again, a picture of their dog or something warm. Even a cushion could be quite nice and something that they actually love and warm. Somebody actually I've been working with brought in, she's got a therapy teddy, and so it's a therapy teddy bear she's had from another sort of therapy, and she brings that in now as well. And it's an actual object, but again, that reminds her of bringing that sort of warmth, soothing into the therapy. So I think that's absolutely great.
Fascinating. And and is it right that nurturing figures can also intervene in specific trauma memories as well? And if that is right, can you maybe tell us a little bit more about how that works?
Yes, and I think I hope you can see there's a sort of like a stepped approach here. Actually starting with a safe, imagining a calm, relaxing place like a beach is quite a safe thing to do, and then you sort of build up the characters, and then you can build up more characters, and then you sort of see them in different situations. And this is probably the one which is the most helpful, but it is the most intense. So, another example is that the compassionate figure can create protective boundaries around traumatic memories. So say there is a person who has been violent to them, you can imagine the compassionate person standing in front of the individual and having some kind of way of actually having a barrier, and that could be them themselves, or they could be holding something up for them so that they know they're being protected. So again, you can see how reassuring and secure that person can actually feel, and that can be again, they can come at any time. The power of the imagination, any time they want to, they can come up and bring that barrier. And the one I think is really, really lovely is actually when a compassionate figure sort of comes in and helps with the person in that situation. And a good example would be when an individual has had sort of childhood trauma and is perhaps being told off by a parent. So you can actually have the nurturing figure come in and actually console the child, but also actually stand up towards the parent who's telling them off, and actually say the things that the little child doesn't feel able to say. So again, you're kind of interfering, not intervening is a better word, with the actual memory, and actually getting some kind of reparation for that kind of thing. So again, you have to sort of build up quite a strong character in order to do that, but that's actually very, very powerful.
Mm.
And then another one is visualizing self-acceptance and forgiveness. So often, people who've been in therapy have a very strong sense of guilt, shame. We've already spoken about the self-criticism. And so a compassionate image can also help with forgiveness. They actually, if they can't find the words themselves, or they feel as though it's too overwhelming for them, they can perhaps distance it a little bit further and actually ask a compassionate figure to offer words of forgiveness. Or again, being creative, they can actually create, say, like a warm, bright light around them, symbolizing acceptance and understanding. So again, the compassionate image can have powers and actually can create a warm, bright light and everything like that. So actually finding ways of forgiving if it's too difficult for the individual to do that. And again, you can use forgiveness or anything like that with the compassionate chair as well. You can either talk to the compassionate person in that, or imagine being the compassionate person and actually saying whatever they need to say, or visualizing, or whatever it is to say, or again, actually sort of holding the person as well. So again, that's another area you can do. So whatever you can think of in your imagination is what you can do. And also, it's quite important, I think, to get the individual, you ask the questions, to get them to see what they can create. It doesn't come from the therapist; it actually comes from the individual's own mind. And once they kind of access the possibilities, it can take them much further than it can in reality, because this individual nurturing figure can have superpowers and can do what they like. They can whisk them away. They can get them to fly. Why not? Whatever it is that they need to do. And I know that's not based in reality, but sometimes it's good for that individual client to feel that warmth and support, to actually feel this sense of being self-soothed.
Get a sense of just how flexible somebody's doing, because it's in cancer. Also, how it can be used in a real world setting when we go back home and we're not in that session. Just feels like a really flexible tool. I guess I'm wondering what the other strategies where this idea of nurturing figure.
Mm. Yeah. So again, what often happens now in therapy is you blend different practices. So um, you might have compassion and mindfulness is another example. Rather than just have mindfulness on its own, can you actually blend them together? It actually sort of brings a different flavor to mindfulness as well. So say that they're focusing on just noticing their thoughts and emotions. Again, they can imagine a person sitting there with them, just encourage them to do that, or just keep saying it's okay, rather than if they're not very good at saying it to themselves, they can imagine a person sitting next to them and just say, it's okay, just accept it's fine, you're doing a great job, and everything like that. So that's an example of encouraging people to be in the here and now through mindfulness and actually using compassion as well. Another example is compassionate breathing. So most people know breathing slowly in and breathing slowly out, sort of diaphragmatic breathing or belly breathing, it's called. Well, again, you can add a little bit of a compassionate flair in that as well. So you can actually breathe in compassion from their compassionate image, sort of see them bringing that in as well. And again, you've got that smiling, warmth feeling as well. And then breathing out, taking away shame, distress, or anxiety. And you can even imagine the actual compassionate image taking away that for them as well and sort of putting it somewhere else as well. So it's actually sort of going as well, then taking in more of the good stuff and then breathing out the kind of the things that they actually want to sort of breathe as well. So again, what it does do, I think, is develop a richer toolkit for imagining all kinds of problems, emotions, coping with trauma, most of all, fostering self-compassion and resilience. Um, and this is a really important skill, I think. Maybe it's the goal of therapy is actually to have a more better relationship with yourself. And if you can actually be strong and self-compassionate, and these sort of techniques help you to be there, I think that's the main focus on therapy.
Really, really interesting. So thank you for that. And finally, if people have listened to today's podcast and to reach out for professional help, what do they do? How do they go about it?
Well, the best way of getting in touch with me is via my website, wendycastellino.com. And there's an email there where you can contact me, and that's the best way. Or sometimes you just Google my name and my contact details will come up. So Wendy Castellino, if anybody's interested in finding more about how to develop these nurturing figures.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. And also, of course, organisations like Big Therapy, with people looking for support, they can reach out to us as well. Hopefulminds.co.uk. It's www.hopefulminds.co.uk. We have lots and lots of free resources on the website, lots of free consultations as well. Presentations, videos, and I'd like to thank you, Wendy, for a really, really fascinating podcast. Podcast, so I'm sure listeners will have done as well. Just like to thank everyone for listening. So thank you.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you everybody for listening.